Two balls and a strike to count on Taylor. Reyes fires, swing and a drive, deep left field. This is way back. Walk the ball. Chris Taylor.
What's up, everybody? Welcome into DodgerHeads, presented by DodgerBlue.com. My name is Jeff Spiegel, joined tonight by Matt Moreno. Matt, misery, I think that's the best word. Frustration, what word do we want to go with to describe the absolute disaster of a 3+ hour game that we just witnessed?
Yeah, I think I'll definitely go with frustrating. The Dodgers, they had at least one base runner on in all 9 innings, obviously left the bases loaded. As the game was kind of going along, you're thinking, okay, but if they keep putting a guy on by the time the 5th or 6th inning comes, surely they'll, break through and get a run across, and it just wasn't happening. And, subpar at bats. And I know we'll get into all of it. There's just so much to unpack from tonight.
Yeah, I'll throw some numbers at you that I think summarize where I'm at on this one. The Dodgers took 28 at-bats with a runner on base. I don't think you can think about, there are 9 innings in a game. They had more than 3 at-bats per inning. They averaged more than 3 at-bats per inning with runners on base. They had a man on in every inning, as you said. I think it's important to point out, every single one of those guys reached with 1 out or fewer. It was either the leadoff hitter or the second hitter reached base in every single inning. The Dodgers, as a team, were 2 for 10 with runners in scoring position, which is misleading because one of those was an infield single that didn't score anybody. They had 16 base runners. They left 14 of them on base. They scored just 2 runs. This, by the way, in a bullpen game against a team who entered the weekend with the 25th best ERA for a bullpen in all of baseball. We're going to talk, of course, about the umpire errors because there was a strike call against Gavin Lux that changed the complexion of this game. There was a, whatever you want to call it, with Brandon Crawford that changed the complexion of this game. All of that, throw it into a pot, and a 3-2 loss to the Giants in San Francisco, Matt, and that is a recipe for pretty much the worst way to spend 3 hours that I could possibly imagine for the Dodgers. Just a brutal 3-2 loss. They lose their 2nd in a row, and all of this on a day when we thought it was going to be joyful. Clayton Kershaw returns. The Dodgers, seemingly in a good position against a bullpen, against, as I said, a team that was not very good, but the Dodgers offense just could not get it done, and Matt, this has been a theme of what we've seen recently. The Dodgers offense has sputtered. Yes, it's the best offense in baseball. And yet, for the past few days, a bunch of guys, Justin Turner has struggled. Chris Taylor has struggled. Mookie Betts in a terrible slump, comes up in a couple big spots and can't do anything. And so when you look at this one, it's the offense that we're going to talk about because it's pretty funny that everything I just said, we didn't even mention the pitching, and Clayton Kershaw, 4 innings coming back, bullpen after that, they kind of did their job.
Yeah, definitely. With the lineup, I haven't really been able to. I know we've discussed it a few times on different shows now in the kind of 2+ months in the season, and it's very much stop and go with them. And I don't know. Obviously you can point to XYZ players are struggling, and who is struggling. We've discussed that. At this point, I don't really know what the reason is for it. Early on, I thought maybe the shortened spring training, the weird off season, not being able to, work out at official team facilities. I thought that was all kind of to blame. And after a month, maybe 6 weeks, things would kind of pick up. Obviously, in terms of fly balls, the dead baseballs, I think have a role in that. But in some of these at bats with the Dodgers of late, they're really not even putting the ball in play, much less making a ton of, solid contact. If they were, a bunch of fly balls to the warning track or getting caught at the wall, then, maybe we could say, well, hey, it's just unfortunate. It's the baseballs. It's just what's going on now. But, the Mookie at bat, Doval could not find, he was basically, he only had control of his, if you want to call it that, his slider.
Yeah.
And he was throwing that for a strike, 25, 30% of the time. Yeah. And honestly, what it got to, I think it got to 3-0 right on Mookie. I was thinking, just take 3 pitches. And if
the announcer said it, they're because they said, oh, does he have the green light here? And he goes, no. This guy's not going to throw you 3 straight strikes.
Yeah, I absolutely would have. And I know Twitter would have gone crazy had Mookie not swung the bat at all. But I think that would have been worth a risk. Make him throw me 3 strikes in a row before he throws 1 ball. And I don't think, and Doval didn't do it. Mookie chased out of the zone.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's the thing because, again, we'll get to individual breakdowns, but he's throwing the slider. That pitch was never a strike. Even if you're looking at it, say maybe it's catching the very outer corner, it would have to have been a fastball, and you're not looking fastball. That's the part that baffled me. It's not a slider that came back over the plate. It's a slider that started low and outside and finished even further. We'll get to all of it. There's frustration all around. We're going to get to all this. I see people in the chat frustrated. They've got some opinions, some people that aren't very thrilled. And look, you've got two people right here with you in the same boat. But let's talk about how this one broke down. Clayton Kershaw comes back, making his first start in quite a long time. They knew he was going to be on a pitch count. His first inning, a 1-2-3 inning, 11 pitches. You're thinking, all right, he gets a strikeout of the first batter, a guy in Austin Slater who has historically performed well against him. You're feeling good about Kershaw. The Dodgers put a runner on base in the first. The leadoff man gets on for the Dodgers. One out in the first. The leadoff man in the second, but they can't cash anything in. The bottom of the second is where Clayton Kershaw runs into trouble. Gets the first guy out, gives up a home run on a hanging slider, walks, single, strikeout, single. That single to the ninth hitter to go up 2-0, and then another strikeout to get it out of it. But that 31-pitch inning comes back to haunt them because it ends up shortening Kershaw's stretch. He ends up going just 4 innings. The overall line, not terrible for Clayton Kershaw. 3 hits, 2 earned runs, 2 walks, but he leaves the game in a 2-0 game. Let's pause real quick in sort of our recap, just briefly, Matt, your perception of Clayton Kershaw. We weren't expecting perfection, but, I mean, you look at the box score, 4 innings, 3 hits, 2 walks, 2 earned, 4 strikeouts. Like, that's fine, right? Like, you expect to win the game if Clayton Kershaw gives you that, and the bullpen, little did we know, was going to give you 4 shutout.
Yeah, definitely. I think also if you want to look at Freddie, Kershaw had the pickoff after the base hit, but Freeman threw. It wasn't necessarily the wrong play. I think he just threw too early over to third base. I forgot who was there, but the runner hadn't gotten far enough off the bag.
Yeah, he was actually leaning back to third by the time Freeman threw the ball.
Right. So, and honestly, it's tough. I'm not necessarily going to fault Freeman, but that was a factor because it added more pitches onto Kershaw's tally, and then so did the Gavin Lux error. So without both of those, maybe without one of them, it's possible that he at least pitches into the 5th inning, and then maybe it looks a little bit better in the box score. But honestly, I think it was fine. He hung the slider to Estrada. That was a home run. You can't expect him to be perfect coming off the injured list and, pitching in a major league game for the first time in over a month. So, 2 runs for, even if you want to call it kind of, make-believe 5 innings type thing, it had that sort of feel. You take it, and it was a 2-0 game. And frankly, he should have exited with the game at least tied, if not the Dodgers leading 3-2, 4-2 because of how many opportunities they had.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the Dodgers go 0 for their first 10 with runners on base. That stretches you into the 3rd inning. That was Justin Turner making that last out. He's 6 for his last 39, by the way, by the end of this game. Cody Bellinger gets the first single with the runner on base. Of course, a single, so it doesn't do anything. Chris Taylor, 97 mile an hour, rope right at the first baseman. The Dodgers go to 1 of 12 with runners on base. That number would get as high as 1 for 16 in the top of the 6th when Cody Bellinger gets out to end the 6th inning. Thankfully, in the 7th is when things seem like they are starting to progress in the right direction. You get a leadoff walk. You're like, okay, we've seen this story before. A leadoff walk, what can we expect? Gavin Lux gets a single. All of a sudden, we're 2 for 17 with runners on base. Things are trending in the right direction. Mookie Betts, infield single, and we've got the bases loaded with nobody out. And Freddie Freeman, Trey Turner, Max Muncy, Will Smith, all due up at this point. Freddie Freeman steps to the plate. Just a brutal at-bat. They bring a relief pitcher in, another guy who's struggling to find the zone. He swings on a fastball that, as the announcers put it, was absolutely never a strike. And just weird. Of all the guys that I would never expect to do that, it's him. I mean, we've seen Mookie do that. We've seen Trey Turner do that. We've seen pretty much everybody swing at stuff. Freddie seems like the guy who's able to balance things. He can't. And then Trey Turner on the very next pitch hits into as perfect of a double play ball as you could possibly go. That moves the Dodgers to 3 of 20. So they have the bases loaded, nobody out in a 2-0 game. They score no runs. Well, guess what? Top of the 8th inning, we're right back at it. Will Smith, a 1-out single. He's back, it seems. Justin Turner reaches on an error and then is replaced by Eddie Alvarez. Cody Bellinger, ground rule double. All of a sudden, it's 2-1. Dodgers are on the board. You're looking at it, say, hey, 2nd and 3rd with 1 out. We're ready. They get another walk. Chris Taylor walks off Camilo Doval, as you mentioned, can't throw strikes. And then you've got Gavin Lux, who is the number 9 hitter. But how many guys are ahead of Gavin Lux that you want up in that position the way that this season has gone? He's been on fire lately. He gets to a 2-1 count, and Doval throws a pitch that is 2 to 3 inches off the outside of the plate. And I made a note to myself, like, you know what? I'm not going to make it about that because of all of the things that came after it. He ends up striking out. Mookie Betts ends up striking out after a 3-0 count. The Dodgers shot themselves in the foot, Craig Kimbrel, etc., over and over and over again. And yet, when the Dodgers end up losing 3-2 in the way that they do, I think you have to talk about this because Gavin Lux, it's a 2-1 count. That ball is 3 inches outside. If that's a 3-1 count against a guy who can't throw strikes, that completely changes the complexion of the game, because a walk in that situation scores a run and the game is tied. Instead, the whole at-bat changes. Gavin Lux ends up chasing a slider out of the zone. Would have been ball 4. Instead, it is strike 3. Matt, am I overreacting to that pitch? Because that pitch, that's like, I hate making it about the umpires. And trust me, don't mishear me, I'm not blaming the umpires that the Dodgers lost, okay? When you have as many opportunities as they did, you can't blame the umpires. But it's also not black and white. It doesn't have to be either or. We can say that's a terrible call in a massive spot. And if you're talking about run expectancy, 3-1 with the bases loaded versus 2-2 with the bases loaded is a huge shift. And we saw it play out exactly like we feared.
Yeah, I mean, I think both things can be true. One, if you're the Dodgers, like, you can't blame your loss on that one call, because like you said, they had, countless opportunities throughout the game. And even after that, I mean, look at the ninth inning, like, they put together another rally. But it also can be true and said that the home plate umpire significantly impacted the potential outcome, at least that at bat, with that call. So, I think it's just one of those things where, unfortunately, both things are kind of true. And like I just said, you can't fully blame the loss on that, but it did have an impact. And I mean, I don't know.
Yeah, and look, we can't play it out exactly what would have happened in a 3-1 count, but those are just, again, think about how you felt as a fan if Gavin Lux is up 3-1 versus 2-2. 2-2, you're immediately nervous. 3-1, you're like, all right, we've got a pitch to play with. Mookie Betts comes up after him, a 3-0 count against him. Doval battles back, ends up striking Mookie Betts out again on a pitch outside of the zone. So the Dodgers go 0 for 4 with the bases loaded. They had the bases loaded, nobody out, and scored no runs. They had the bases loaded with 1 out and scored no runs. And that's with, by the way, Freddie Freeman, Trey Turner, Mookie Betts, and Gavin Lux. Pretty much the 4 guys, maybe outside of Will Smith, that you would have wanted up in that position. They had their 4 best chances. None of them could come through. Bottom of the 8th, it's a 2-1 game at this point. Craig Kimbrel comes in. This is a guy who has not pitched since June 5th, had been on paternity leave since Tuesday. I don't know about you. If I was on paternity leave, I wasn't throwing bullpen sessions in the middle of the day. Clearly, Craig Kimbrel did not seem to be throwing bullpen sessions while he was away either. He loads the bases with nobody out. He throws 8 straight balls to batters number 2 and 3, which brings up Brandon Crawford, and huge moment for home plate umpire number 2 of this game. It's a 1-1 count. Kimbrel throws a breaking ball that, look, I don't know why Craig Crawford is even close to swinging at this pitch, but he does. The ball bounces in the dirt. It clearly, nobody is arguing that it hit Crawford's foot, ends up skipping away. Jock Peterson comes in to score. The ball is called a strike, not on a check swing, but just a full swing is essentially what the umpire called. The Dodgers come out to challenge to say, hey, it hit his foot. As far as we know, all we have is the announcers and what they've said. We haven't gotten an update post-game. The umpires would not let them challenge whether or not this hit the batter. Now, AJ Pierzynski, I loved what he said. He said, look, all I'm telling you is that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. You can challenge a hit by pitch. You can't challenge a check swing. The Dodgers were not trying to challenge a check swing. They were essentially trying to challenge a hit by pitch. It had already been called a strike. Jock Peterson ends up coming in to score. Evan Phillips comes in, gets out of the entire mess that Craig Kimbrel creates after he strikes out Brandon Crawford. But guess what? That run that scored on that play ends up being the decider, and the Dodgers lose by 1 because of that. We'll get to the 9th in a minute, but talk to me through that one, Matt. I know you're sort of probably checking Twitter a little bit. Have we gotten any clarity? Was it a misinterpretation of the rules? Is it a stupid rule that you can challenge some things and can't challenge others? Where do you sort of land and understand on this piece?
Yeah, I haven't seen anything yet. I'm sure Dave Roberts will. He's not one to fully unload and criticize umpires, but I think when he knows he's kind of in the right and that something should have been reviewed, I think he'll, voice his frustration with that. To me, that whole sequence it ties back to what's kind of a bigger conversation for me. And one thing that I've been on here with you, and you and I have, difference of opinions with some of the pace of play stuff. Like this, for me, this is another example of MLB worrying too much about the wrong things of, hey, we're going to change this to improve this. We're going to do this to make the game better this way. When this is a pretty straightforward rule that, like the announcer said, should be reviewed. Yeah. There wasn't any confusion on was it a check swing or a full swing, because the umpire at home plate called him on the swing. He said, it was a strike because of that. So for that alone, I don't want to completely sidetrack us from the post-game discussion, but for me, it just ties back to MLB, in my opinion, is worried about trying to quote unquote fix the wrong things without making sure some of the basic common sense issues are sort of in order first.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's like the idea that some things are reviewable and other things aren't. Like, okay, I'm not saying we should review balls and strikes. If you don't want to review check swings, I'm fine with that. Like, everything else should be in play. We shouldn't have to sit here arguing, wait, can you review this or can you not? It's like, do we have video that gives us the ability to make the right call, yes or no? Because if the answer is yes, we should be reviewing it. But again, we're not sitting here and saying the Dodgers simply lost because of a bad strike call to Gavin Lux and a bad, whatever you want to call that, decision by the home plate umpire on that one. What we're saying is the Dodgers played terribly. They deserve a lot of the blame. And yet, if the umpires make a couple of calls correctly, we're probably not sitting here nearly as frustrated because there's a chance that this baseball game is still going on. The reason is because in the top of the ninth, Freddie Freeman, whose last at bat ended with him striking out with the bases loaded and nobody else, decides to absolutely smash a ball into right center field for a home run. Again, if the Crawford play is ruled correctly, we're tied. It was not, and so the Dodgers are down by 1. Trey Turner follows it up with a single. Nobody out, Trey Turner on first base. Max Muncy strikes out. At no point, by the way, does Trey Turner decide to steal. What are your thoughts on that? Because it's a big moment. And I get if he gets thrown out, it looks terrible. But they're reading off the stats where Trey Turner is stealing successfully at something like an 80 to 85%. You've got a catcher who throws people out successfully at a 20% clip. As Eric Karros pointed out, he tried to bunt and took a 91-mile-an-hour fastball right off of his knuckles earlier in the game. Explain to me why 2 batters in. It's not like he didn't have enough chances. Muncy strikes out and Will Smith grounds out, but Smith grounded out on the 4th pitch of that at bat. So he had about 7 or 8 chances to steal and never steals. Are you okay with that decision? Do you leave it in the hands of Will Smith, who, for all intents and purposes, was 3 for 4 up until that point, has been one of the better hitters? Or do you take your chances getting Trey Turner in scoring position?
Yeah, I think once it got to Will Smith, I'm a little more understanding because I think had Trey Turner stolen second base with Smith batting, I think they do intentionally walk him to then face, Eddie Alvarez was on deck, but ended up being Hanser Alberto. But, with Muncy batting and Smith behind him, I think you need to run the risk because for me, Trey Turner, obviously, his speed speaks for itself, and then you have, like you said, Kirk Caselli isn't, throwing runners out at a prolific rate.
2 for 10 was the stat they gave us.
So you have those factors, and if worst case scenario, if he is thrown out for whatever reason, if Muncy runs into one, the game is tied.
Yeah,
it's not like you needed the Trey Turner run on base and a home run to tie the game. Obviously, had Trey still been on base, and if Muncy were to if Trey were to get thrown out and then Muncy hits a home run, like you think, oh man, we could have had the lead, but you're tied. Like there are worse positions to be in. So I didn't understand it at all. I didn't understand not even trying. It sort of reminded me of I forgot what year it was, but when D. Gordon was getting the huge lead off first base in the playoffs, like every single game.
John Lester, it was against the Cubs because Lester refused to throw over to first base.
And he just wouldn't run. Or that wasn't maybe D. Gordon was from the Cardinals.
I don't think it was D. Gordon. It was every Dodger player. They would get like 12 to 15 feet off of first base and never run.
Right. Yeah. And I was just thinking, like, what do you guys do? Like, either go or just stop doing that. Anyway.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I didn't. I'm willing to accept it a little bit more once Will Smith was batting. But when Max Muncy was at the plate, like Trey Turner should have tried stealing, in my opinion, on pretty much every single pitch that was thrown.
You make a great point on the Will Smith, by the way, because that's something I hadn't considered, which is if Trey Turner takes second, it's possible it's likely they walk Will Smith to get to the Eddie Alvarez spot that ends up being Hanser Alberto, knowing that even if Alberto were to reach, you've still got Cody Bellinger behind, who's not a guy, if we're being honest, yes, he had a ground rule double, that you're necessarily afraid of. That's ultimately what they ended up getting because Will Smith grounds into what was almost a double play. He beats it out at first. Alberto comes in for Alvarez, who had come in for Justin Turner. Justin Turner, by the way, if anybody wants to make it about that, was 0 for 4. He's 6 for his last 39. The decision to pinch run for him on third base was absolutely the right one. Alberto reaches on an infield single, so you can't complain about that. And then Cody Bellinger grounds out to end the game. The Dodgers finished 5 for 28 with runners on base, 2 for 10 with runners in scoring position. This a day after being 0 for 4 with runners in scoring position. I see some folks in the chat, and I want to get to them and get to some questions here. There's a lot of questions and comments about Dave Roberts, a popular topic of conversation in here. Marco is a comment that has gotten some traction here, so I'll throw it up. He says, yes, the Dodgers are the best team every year. They need the right manager who can motivate millionaires to give a little extra because it's the extras that win the World Series. So the Dodgers have won a World Series. In case we're forgetting, in 2020, Dave Roberts was the manager of that team. Look, if you watch this show long enough, you know I am about as far from a Dave Roberts homer as you could possibly find. Most of these post-game shows, I shouldn't say most, I would say about 1 out of every 3 of these post-game shows ends up being me and Daniel or me and you in some form, me complaining about Dave Roberts one way or the other. I honestly am I have no clue how we get to blaming Dave Roberts for this particular loss. I don't know what he did wrong. Like, I don't know. Like, do we think the Dodgers weren't trying hard enough, and that's why they were 5 for 28 with runners on base? Were they trying hard to get on base all of those times, and then they stopped trying when a guy got on? Look, I'll say this, and then I'll turn it over to you, Matt. If you want to understand the value of Dave Roberts, you should go back and look at the Padres of 2021. Now, you might be saying to yourself, what the heck did the 2021 Padres have to do with Dave Roberts? Here's the answer. The Padres last year were as talented as the Dodgers were. Those two teams did not finish anywhere near each other in the standings, and the Padres fired their manager. The reason is not because the Dodgers were immensely more talented than the Padres. It's because Dave Roberts, whether you love him or hate him or whatever, have to admit that Dave Roberts is able to keep people focused, and we can talk about bullpen decision, whatever. If there's one thing he's good at, it's actually exactly what Marco is complaining about, which is motivating millionaires, to use your language. Because the Dodgers have not underperformed in the regular season, I would argue, in any of the seasons that Dave Roberts has been manager. You could say they should have beaten the Giants last year. Look, they had the second best record in all of baseball. Okay, so if they did underperform, it was by about this much last year. If you want to blame Dave Roberts for some postseason stuff, we could have that conversation, but that's not what Marco's complaining about. He's complaining about Dave Roberts' ability to control a clubhouse, and I would argue that Dave Roberts has more talent and more pressure and more ego than anybody else in the league in his clubhouse, and he has dealt with it fantastically over and over again. So if you want to complain about Dave, my only response to this, Marco, is that this is the wrong thing to complain about. Matt, what do you think?
Yeah, I agree with you. I'll address it. I'll keep it kind of short just because there's a Buehler MRI update coming in that we should probably get to also. With Dave, I think I agree with you. You know, I've always been on the fence that Dave Roberts isn't up there swinging the bat. Like, he's not striking out. He's not taking those at bats. So how much blame you can really put on him, in my opinion, depending on what the situation is, minimal. Like, if, you know, tactical stuff in the postseason, I think those have definitely there have been decisions that could be questioned. I think in terms of today's game and maybe this season in general, you know, the furthest I'll kind of go is just looking at lineup construction. You know, Max Muncy just came back. He's obviously been struggling all year. Like, should he necessarily be batting? Like, I thought we kind of settled on Will Smith batting cleanup. He was hitting well in the cleanup spot. Like, why did we change it? And I know some of that is Dave Roberts isn't the type of person to take a quote unquote job or position away from somebody because of an injury, which is what kind of happened to Muncy. The counter argument, of course, could be that Muncy wasn't necessarily hitting well enough anyway to warrant remaining in the DH spot. But yeah, I mean, I agree with you. And I think we could probably do, you know, kind of a separate video discussing the pros and cons of Dave Roberts. But I still kind of come back to if Dave Roberts isn't going to be the manager, then who? Because there is not a clear-cut upgrade or improvement out there or available.
Yeah, I agree. And look, I think we could argue about the impact of Dave Roberts and the manager in baseball, really anything in general. But I'm just saying, like, I think we can sort of fail to appreciate the things that Dave Roberts does well, which, again, I would say is consistency. There are plenty of teams that are really, really talented that underperform. The Dodgers don't. Like, we could talk about the bullpen management and that kind of thing, but the fact that these guys show up every day and end up putting up, you know, you put 3 guys in the top 7 Cy Young Award, you know, last year. You had a couple guys in the MVP conversation as well. And so, anyways, let's get to, as you said, a big storyline here, which is the Walker Buehler update. This was an update. Let me see. I was going to throw it up here, but it looks like we just lost it. Fabian Ardaya just posted an update here, and so I can get most of it on the screen. But this is what Fabian Ardaya said, quoting. I shouldn't say Fabian Ardaya. This is him talking about what Dave Roberts said. Dave Roberts has said Walker Buehler's MRI revealed a strain in his elbow. No surgery planned. He will rest and rehab it. Won't pick up a baseball for 6 to 8 weeks. I don't know. Is this good news? Is this bad news, Matt? Where are you at on what you think here? The rest of the tweet, by the way, is so will miss significant time, though Roberts did not rule out a return this season.
It's tough. It's not Tommy John, which obviously, you know, I think is everybody's first kind of concern whenever you're discussing forearm, elbow issues for a pitcher. So I guess it's encouraging from that sense. The fact that it is still a ligament strain, I think, is cause for concern, because my question would be, you know, it's obviously pretty severe if Buehler's not going to be picking up a baseball for 6 to 8 weeks. So my concern would be, okay, if you go kind of the rest and rehab route, what if that doesn't work? Is Tommy John then required at that point? And if it is, I mean, I guess, if whether he has a surgery now or 10 weeks from now, all of next year pretty much would be a wash. But either way, it's a significant blow for the team. I think obviously we're going to be discussing the starting rotation moving forward and potential trade options at the deadline. And that's going to be interesting because I don't know. Andrew Friedman's not somebody who's going to overpay. And if teams feel like the Dodgers are desperate and they have a starter that the Dodgers may need, then they're going to, in my opinion, try to then, ask for the moon. And we've already seen it in other trades, right? Where, the Padres might acquire a starting pitcher for prospects 7, 8, 9 in their farm system. But, reports for the Dodgers were, it needed to be an elite caliber, an elite group of prospects that were going to have to be traded. So kind of in the middle. I mean, obviously we're both sort of dissecting and reacting to this. It's unfortunate. And it's obviously a big loss. I know Buehler had struggled this season, but you and I think we're in agreement that he was going to find it because we've seen him find it before. Yeah. And now, I mean, who knows what he's going to look like come September, really, if that's when he's pretty much back.
Yeah, and I mean, look, I think my initial reaction is this is a real injury. This is not like a phantom IL stint where you just send a guy away for a couple of weeks and say, hey, clear your mind. 6 to 8 weeks is not the type of thing you do with a guy like Walker Buehler when you're in a tight division race, when you lost the division last year. That's not a 6 to 8 week don't touch a baseball situation. And so this tells me that we should be concerned that it's a real injury. As you said, I'm not a doctor. I don't know enough to know whether it's the right decision to not get Tommy John. They say it's a strain. As you said, is that something that's going to develop and get worse? And then 3 months from now, he's going to get Tommy John, which would cost him this season and the entirety of next season. Tough to say. Obviously, these are all speculative things. I mean, I guess the good news is that it's not Tommy John. Like, we have avoided, for now, at least temporarily, we've kicked the can down the road on the absolute worst case scenario, which is good news. But again, the headline here from Dave Roberts, Walker Buehler's absence will be months and not weeks, 6 to 8 weeks without touching a baseball for Walker Buehler. The obvious question, we're getting it everywhere inside of the chat, which is, does this require the Dodgers then to go and make a move? This was something I talked about on my Twitter earlier as I sort of woke up and was thinking about the Walker Buehler situation and the injury and how this would affect things, because I've said kind of all along, hey, I'm not sure that the Dodgers need to go out and get a starter. They had a bunch of different guys that they could have gone to. They've got 5 more starters in addition, because we weren't speculating about a Walker Buehler injury. We were speculating about if the Dodgers have 6 starters, what do they do? But Walker Buehler and Julio Urias would have been the 2 guys in my mind, the more I think about it, that changed that. If one of those 2 guys was going to miss extended time, that's where it shifts. And this is why I said it. It's because, yes, the Dodgers will have 5 quality arms about a week from now when Andrew Heaney comes back. But the problem is you are now relying on 5 guys that 4 of whom you don't really have a ton of belief can continue to perform. I think Julio is the one guy that you can have some semblance of confidence in. And even Julio, somebody in the comments could easily probably quickly point out that last season was the first season he ever did it. So you could argue that Julio has done it once. Clayton Kershaw is getting up there in age, has already been injured. Andrew Heaney getting up there has already been injured. Tony Gonsolin, last start means he has now thrown more innings in the major leagues this year than he ever has in one season his entire career. 83.2 is the most innings he has thrown in one season. That was back in 2018 at high A. Tyler Anderson threw 167 innings pitched last year, so maybe you feel good about Anderson's durability. And yet the question then is, do you feel good about Anderson's performance continuing at the level that it is? And so for me, yes, a week from now, the Dodgers will have 5 starting pitchers that you feel pretty good about in the short term. My problem is, do they have 3.5 to 4 that you feel good about in the long term, looking ahead to October and November? And for me, if I had to bet the 2022 season on do I feel good about who I have now, I would not place that bet. I would say I need to go out and I need to make a move, which, by the way, the one other thing I'll add here is the Dodgers have trade chips. And I don't just mean they have them technically. It's almost like they have coupons that are about to expire. They've got a bunch of guys on the 40-man roster now, and they've got a bunch of guys that need to be added to the 40-man roster this offseason. And if they don't add all those guys, they will lose them for nothing. And these are not nobodies. These are lottery tickets. These are guys that are going to be competent major leaguers. So can you package 3 or 4 of them, maybe with one guy like a Michael Busch type, to go and get a Frankie Montas or somebody like that? I think the answer is trending and tilting way more in the yes direction for me, Matt. Where are you at on this one?
Yeah, so I'll disagree with you from the standpoint of, honestly, before Buehler's injury, I was thinking that the Dodgers needed to trade for a starter at the
Okay.
deadline. I think his injury now changes the caliber of pitcher that I feel they need to go get. I think they could have gotten away with maybe trading for a pretty good number 3 guy who would have slotted in as, a number 4 option in the event that something, either regression or just something happens with the Gonsolin, Heaney, Anderson group.
Yeah.
With Buehler gone now, I think you need, I won't necessarily say an ace, but a pretty impactful starter, because again, I know a lot of fans are frustrated and upset with the team right now. I'm still not too concerned with the regular season. I think it's a long year and the Dodgers have enough depth and talent to get to the playoffs. So my bigger concern is, okay, once you get into the postseason, what is that going to look like?
Yeah.
And, I agree with you. They do have trade chips. And, I think if they don't necessarily go out and trade for somebody big, does Ryan Pepio kind of step up? I don't know, with some of the control issues we've seen, I'm not sure if he's somebody who you can really count on in big situations, unless, come after the All-Star break, they throw him into the rotation and say, hey, you're going to be starting pretty regularly, and he can iron his stuff out. Obviously, maybe kind of a wild card is Bobby Miller. We haven't seen him yet. Maybe he comes up and can kind of give you some starts, but I know he was speculated as a potential bullpen option come October, because that's kind of like the trendy thing to do with your young prospects initially. But yeah, I am firmly in the camp of needed to trade for a starting pitcher, a week ago, and absolutely need to now with the Buehler news.
Yeah, let's not forget, by the way, that I did predict Bobby Miller makes a postseason start for the Dodgers this year. So I don't know if I hope I'm right or wrong in that situation. But I think Gary makes a point. Hey, the postseason is actually all we care about as Dodger fans. Gary in the chat joining us via YouTube. We appreciate everybody. By the way, on YouTube, on Facebook, on Twitter, the engagement as expected after a game like this has been positive. And so I agree that the postseason all we care about. So that's what I'm talking about. We could say, that's my point, is we might have 5 guys we trust now, but if I tell you Buehler's not coming back and you have to ride with Urias, Kershaw, Gonsolin, and Anderson in the postseason, even if I tell you all 4 of those guys are going to be healthy, are you going and winning a World Series with those 4 guys, Andrew Heaney being the 5th? Maybe, but I don't think we can assume that all those guys are going to be healthy. So if I say one of those 4 is going to be out, so it's going to be Urias, let's say Kershaw, and let's say Gonsolin gets hurt, and you've got Anderson and Heaney. Do we feel good about that? Because I think the answer would be no. And that's when you say, go out and trade someone. Again, I would add that the Dodgers have coupons that are waiting to expire on their 40-man roster and at the AAA and AA level, that they can cash in and try and go get somebody. Because you look, Trey Turner, this is his last season on contract. This is not a year that you just say, hey, kick the can down the road and let's see what happens. You go for it this year, because you never know what the future is going to hold. Look at Walker Buehler, who we penciled in as being an ace on this staff for the next 5 years. All of a sudden he's struggling and now he's hurt. You've got to go for it while you can. Laura in the chat asked about Dustin May. He is a guy who could come back. The last update we got was at the end of April that he had completed a series of bullpen pitches of about 25 to 30 pitches. The report from Bill Plunkett was that he could begin throwing live batting practice in, quote, about a month. This was on April 27th, according to RotoWire. It is now June 11th, and we have heard nothing of live batting practice being thrown by Dustin May. So I'm assuming if he had been throwing a live batting practice, if that had happened, we would have heard about it. And so we're talking about a guy who's maybe in August is due back, and then you've got to build him up. So could he potentially be a guy that gets built up to maybe 1 or 2 regular season starts and then a postseason start? Sure, but that goes into the same category I just said of we're throwing all those chips in one basket. That's like betting on snake eyes on a craps table. Technically, you could win, but the odds are definitely not in your favor. And so I would be concerned if I was a Dodger fan, if I was banking on Dustin May coming back healthy, Tony Gonsolin sustaining what he's currently doing, Tyler Anderson sustaining his current success, Andrew Heaney staying healthy and sustaining success, Clayton Kershaw staying healthy, and Julio Urias repeating. Julio's the one I feel the best about. Let me repeat that. But you're telling me I need to go 3 for 5 on those other 5? No thanks.
Yeah, it's tough. And, Dustin May, I think he definitely has the potential and talent. But like you said, if you're counting on him, he's coming off a significant injury. He wouldn't have pitched for a long period of time. And so to throw him into the rotation and say, hey, we need you to basically be potentially our number 3 starter, if not number 4, that's risky. And I was skeptical to begin with. I prefaced it with, if injuries set in, I thought the Dodgers would sort of pivot, but I believed heading into this season that Dustin May would end up being a bullpen option because I didn't know. I believe that the Dodgers would be conservative with his kind of rehab process. And then would that leave him enough time to sort of stretch out? I wasn't necessarily sure. Maybe they pivot now with the Walker Buehler news, but yeah, something's got to give, and it'll definitely be an interesting next month or so. And then as we get closer to the trade deadline on the different rumblings and stuff.
Okay, well, if we haven't had enough controversy, you ready for Dave Roberts' commentary on the play? This is Fabian Ardaya again. Dave Roberts said they didn't have a good view from the dugout, so it was actually Trey Turner yelling into the dugout to get them to ask to review it. By then, their challenge window had expired. The play is challengeable. Dave Roberts said he hadn't seen the replay yet. How do you not have a guy on the phone? I mean, it looked like, I forget what the guy's name, Brant Brown, is that who it is? One of the guys hopped on the phone. It seemed like got something. So to hear that basically this game, the go-ahead run, the game-winning run, ends up scoring on a play because the Dodgers missed a challenge window, that somehow makes me feel worse about things.
Yeah, it's rough. I mean, I think, I don't necessarily understand that because to me, anything sort of close in that scenario, you go initiate, like you call your replay room and say, hey, like, what did you see? That way you don't, lose the potential replay window. Because to me, when I was watching it, obviously live on TV, and it's a straightaway camera more or less.
We've got a great angle, yeah.
Right, not the dugout view. Like to me, it clearly, he swung because I thought, oh, he swung and he got hit by the pitch, but obviously it's a strike. And then all of a sudden, the jock is scoring, and I'm thinking, wait a minute, like what's going on here? And there was just mass confusion.
Yeah.
I don't know. Like I said, it's baseball is, if you ask me, baseball's too focused on other things when it needs to get its house in order.
Yeah, and look, my guy is Will Smith. Will Smith had no reaction. I mean, at no point did Will Smith screaming at anybody that hit him. And now, again, Will Smith might have, in some ways, the worst view of anybody because that ball ends up bouncing basically at his knee. He feels it hit off of him. So I suppose he's thinking that ball just spiked, spun, hit the ground, and hit his chest protector. But it was interesting to me that, because I'm like you, I'm like, well, that hit him. But they called it a strike. Great. And Jock scores. And I'm thinking like, all right, they're just going to send everybody back. And they didn't. And then they cut to the Dodgers dugout, and it doesn't seem like they're like, oh, shoot, that sucks that happened. But there's a guy on the phone behind Dave Roberts talking to somebody. So I don't know how at some point, how that, it feels like the challenge window is a vague sense of time, and it feels plenty big to be able to go and pick up the phone. Like, if, again, from my perspective, there shouldn't be a window. You should not be able to get on the phone. You should be watching the game, and you should have like 5 seconds to challenge. There shouldn't be a phone call. But again, we're getting down a rabbit trail. But that one sucks, to know that it is actually reviewable and that the Dodgers just simply missed the window. That one's tough. I don't know what else to say. There was another quote that I just read. This was from Bill Plunkett on Twitter. He was talking about Mookie Betts on his at-bat with the bases loaded. Quote, "It wasn't a great at-bat. It wasn't a bad at-bat. I just chased. He made a good pitch, got himself out of it." And then the line that I love, "He drives a Benz too." I forget who originated that, but it's kind of like, you know what? The guy on the other side drives a Mercedes-Benz too. It's a great line. I like the admission, like, hey, it was a bad, I should say, it wasn't a great at-bat. It wasn't a bad at-bat. I think it was a bad at-bat. That's me personally. But at least he gets up there and isn't, trying to make excuses for himself.
Yeah, I don't know. To answer your question, I guess if somebody said it before Mookie, then it would be news to me. But the Benz quote, he brought it up last year during the NLCS. It was after Bellinger hit his home run. I think it would have been in Game 5. And Bellinger was asked about it, and he's kind of answering. He's talking about the pitch and this and that. And as he's answering, Mookie interrupts him and he says, "Tell him, like, you drive a Benz too." And Bellinger kind of chuckles and he says, "I do have a Mercedes." And that, like, I know, like, this is kind of a lighthearted moment, and like it was for what, like, being there and seeing it happen, because Bellinger being who he is and kind of how he delivers things, it was just so funny, and so that moment kind of lives rent free in my head, if you want to say that.
Yeah. No, I mean, look, it's a great quote, because sometimes we look and say, "Mookie, you're an idiot. Why are you swinging at that?" And the idea is, you know what? I'm facing a guy who's throwing 101 mile an hour fastball, a slider that falls off the face of the earth, and he's one of the better relief pitchers in all of baseball. So you've got to give him some credit there. Let's close out the show. Lots of comments in here about the Dodgers offense. We could go back and look at, obviously, 13 base hits and 5 walks. They have 18 base runners. They score 2 runs. The Giants had 5 hits. They scored 3 runs. I want to point out to all the people criticizing the Dodgers offense, whether you want to acknowledge this or not, they have the best offense in baseball by literally every metric you want to take. And so if you want to take the small sample size of the last, 2 games, you can knock yourself out. But I'm just telling you, over the sample size of the entirety of the season, 59 games, they are still first in baseball when it comes to runs scored per game. They scored 2 runs tonight, 2 runs last night, 11 runs the night before, then 4, 0, 4, 4. So 6, 2. I mean, I don't know. If you add all those numbers up and divide it, and I tell you the Dodgers are averaging 4 or 5 runs a game, that feels pretty good to me. I don't know. We don't get to just cross off the 11 as if it didn't happen. They gave up 9 runs. They scored 11. That there's credit to the offense. Nobody here is arguing after a day like today that the offense is clicking on all cylinders and playing as well as they should be. I'm just saying, can we just take a deep breath? Can we step back from an incredibly frustrating, brutal, disappointing day and say, yes, the offense struggled today, but man, they're scoring a bunch of runs. And I see people on here, VC, saying they beat up on bad teams. Okay, I mean, they beat up on bad teams. There's 37-22, and everyone tells me they lost 5 games to the Pirates. So it seems to me like they're beating up on the good teams and losing to the bad teams. It can't be both at the same time.
Yeah, I agree. And, I think one of the comments I just saw was asking about the Yankees. What's interesting to me is I feel like the Yankees are sort of repeating what we've seen over the last few years, where they have this crazy offense and everybody says, oh, how are they going to be stopped? How are they going to be stopped? And then they don't even end up making it to the World Series.
Yeah.
So, it's tough. And I think, honestly, the lineup and offense is kind of producing. I think what we're getting is a result of talented players going through slumps at times. And so when everybody all of a sudden starts hitting, you're going to see these huge comebacks, these huge innings, the wild game against the White Sox, stuff like that. But when they're struggling, you're going to see a game like today where, they're constantly getting guys on, not necessarily cashing in all the time. And like I said earlier in our show, some of our listeners missed it. I don't necessarily know. I'm kind of at a loss for what's the reason behind so many players dealing with the inconsistency that we've seen. I think one thing, I'm not necessarily saying it's right or wrong, but do the Dodgers need to potentially start evaluating their coaching staff from the standpoint of, I believe they have 3 hitting coaches, one or 2 main guys, and then one might be an assistant, or maybe, they're kind of all split duties. But, is that an approach that worked, but maybe isn't necessarily working now? And you kind of have to adjust there. I don't know one way or the other. But, I think, again, it's a long season, and, kind of trust that these guys will get it sorted out.
Yeah, I mean, again, we could sit here and say, are the hitting coach approaches a mistake? They literally lead baseball in runs per game. That is the goal of offense in baseball, is to score runs. They are doing it more than anybody else in all of baseball. I don't understand why we're sitting here and saying there's a problem. We could talk about individuals, and even tonight is a perfect example. The Dodgers had tons of opportunities to put guys in. I'd have to go back. I've now clicked off of the Dodgers record, but tonight, what'd I say? 18 base runners or something? 16 base runners, I think they had, was the final 13 hits and 3 walks. So 16 base runners the Dodgers had. That's a fantastic 16 base runners in 9 innings. To me, if you want to say that an offense is, I guess it comes, let me put it this way. I think philosophically it comes down to how you think about the game of baseball. Do you think about, does the entire complexion of an at-bat change when there's a runner on base? Is a guy more or less likely to get a hit once there's a runner on base? Or is baseball simply a matter of sequencing? That a guy's going to get a hit once out of every 3 or 4 at-bats, depending on his batting average type of thing. And it's just a matter of, does the guy get his hit while 2 other guys are on base? Or does Freddie Freeman hit the home run and nobody's on base? Right? We could sit here and say, oh, the Dodgers offense sucks because Freddie Freeman struck out with the bases loaded. But then he hit a home run in the 9th inning. Do we see there's a problem there? Or is it just bad luck that he hits the home run in one at-bat and he strikes out in the other? To me, that's I just tend to view baseball as a play on averages. And if you get a bunch of guys on base, eventually you're going to have a higher likelihood of cashing those guys in more than your opponent. And if you put 16 guys on base and your opponent has 10 guys on base, that more often than not, you're going to win the game. And that's not an issue with the hitting coach. It's Brant Brown's fault that Mookie Betts swung at a slider off the plate It's Brant Brown's fault that Gavin Lux got a bad strike 2 call and then swung at a slider off the plate. It's Robert Von Scoyak's fault that Freddie Freeman swung at a fastball that was never a strike with the bases loaded, or that Trey Turner grounded into a double play. But it's not any of those guys' fault when Trey Turner has the longest hitting streak in all baseball and Mookie Betts is tied for the league lead in home runs and leading baseball and wins. Like, do you see what I'm saying? Like, I just think we can pick and choose, and we can all be pissed off about this game and this moment. But I don't know. I feel like I'm ranting. I probably need to calm myself down. I just, if I told you the Dodgers were going to be at this point and leading the league in runs per game, and that we are going to be having a conversation about whether the offense is terrible and whether the hitting coaches should be fired, because you're not saying that, but people in the chat are saying that. To me, that's what crazy. It's crazy. It's crazy.
Yeah, I think you definitely bring up fair points. For me, I would kind of question, like, if there maybe needs to be kind of a change in approach, or I am not privy to how the hitting duties are split up amongst the 3 coaches. So I don't know enough to say Van Scoyoc is doing good enough, but Brant Brown isn't doing good enough. And I agree with you. Like, they can't be to blame if the Dodgers go 1 for 10 with runners in scoring position, because they're not the ones taking the at-bats. But I think it is a little fair to question, like, is there some sort of disconnect between like philosophies or what's being taught or just approaches if, you have so many players kind of struggling right now? And I know that can be baseball in general. Like, you'll see, teams will go into collective slumps, teams will come out of collective slumps. I just think with the talent that this team has, like, it's a little weird that it's gone on for this long with so many players. And so that would kind of be just my only question or concern. And again, I'm not advocating, I'm not saying there needs to be a change with the hitting coaches. I just kind of wonder if at some point, like, is that something that needs to be evaluated if it hasn't been already?
Yeah, and to point, somebody in the comments saying, well, then whose fault is it? Like, if it's not the hitting coach, I would say tonight, on a small sample size basis, I blame Mookie Betts and Trey Turner and Freddie Freeman for coming up and Gavin Lux and coming up in big spots and swinging at pitches that they should not have swung at. But I'm just saying, to then say Mookie Betts sucks or Freddie Freeman sucks or Trey Turner sucks because of one at bat is the foolish part. I would say tonight is Mookie Betts' fault. And then when you zoom out and you look at Mookie Betts and you say he's tied for the league lead in home runs, he's leading the National League in wins above replacement. Freddie Freeman hits a home run. He's hitting about 300. Trey Turner, longest hitting streak. Like, you zoom back and say, well, I'm not going to criticize those guys on the macro level of the entire season. That's how I would look at it. Like, if we want to blame the hitting coaches for guys getting outs with runners in scoring position, we should credit the hitting coaches for putting guys in scoring position to begin with, right? Like, it has to be one. You can't say if they get no credit for this and all the blame for this. The Dodgers had 14 at-bats with runners in scoring position the last 2 games, and they were 2 for 14. Again, one of those 2 was an infield single by Mookie Betts that scored absolutely nobody. Okay? So 2 for 14 with runners in scoring position, and they lost both of those games by what? 1 run? 2 runs? Yes, 3 runs. 3 runs total, something like that. To me, that's not the hitting coach's fault. I don't know. Yeah. And I'm fine being in the minority. This is the beauty of sports, is we can sit here and disagree, and it doesn't mean I think that the people in the comments are stupid, and I hope it doesn't mean they think I'm stupid. I'm just sharing my opinion. I think this was bad luck and bad hitting by guys in small sample sizes, and not something that we should extrapolate out and say, major problem, red flags everywhere.
Yeah, that's fair to say. To kind of get back on the Buehler news, there was another update sent out that the Dodgers clarified the MRI revealed a flexor strain in his right elbow.
Okay.
Which flexor tendon is the one that's kind of, most commonly associated with Tommy John. So I'm back to being, a little more concerned than earlier, but yeah. So that's kind of the hand they've been dealt.
Yeah, as Jason points out, super comment. We appreciate you, Jason. You're not seeing it. 18 guys on base. They still lost. I'm with you. Like, this is why I'm frustrated. I'm not sitting here with my smile on my face and saying, hey, this is awesome. I'm super glad that just happened. 18 guys on base. The Dodgers still lost. I think it was, and, what are you going to do? Because 18 guys on base, some folks that reached on errors. Yeah, I mean, they ended up 5 for 28 with runners on base today. 5 for 28. They were 0 for their first 10, 1 for their first 16. They had the bases loaded and nobody out and scored no runs. They had the bases loaded and 1 out and scored 1 run. They leave the the tying run on first base. I'm with you on all of these, Jason. I see the 18 on base. They still lost. I am pissed at both of those things. I'll ask you, Jason, and if you want to throw your answer in the chat, we'll throw it up there too. Whose fault is it? Like, whose fault? Is it Dave Roberts' fault because guys weren't motivated enough in those 28 at-bats with runners on base? Is it the hitting coaches at bat bad advice because, people think that you're just swinging for home runs, swinging for the fences at all times. Is it Mookie Betts, Freddie Freeman, Trey Turner, Gavin Lux's fault for all not being able to put the ball in play with the bases loaded? That's my question. And so Matty Man's in here. He says it's the player's fault. That's what I said. That's where I'm at. Like, I blame these guys. I just don't think it's a macro picture. So there you go. It's the offense's fault. One person says, sure. Yeah, I agree. It's the offense's fault. I just don't think it's a fault. The offense's fault as far as like, we should just burn the whole thing down and start cutting people and trading people and firing people. I think it's worth remembering that the Dodgers have, I don't know where it stands after this loss. Okay. So Jason says it's the hitters. He blames the hitters. You and me, Jason, we agree on this. And I think we all agree that Mookie Betts is good at baseball, that Freddie Freeman's good at baseball, that Trey Turner's good at baseball. I won't include Gavin Lux in that category because that gets polarizing. But if I told you those three guys were going to have at-bats with the bases loaded and the Dodgers are going to score no runs, I don't think we'd be sitting here blaming somebody on the outside. I think we'd look at those three guys and say, Mookie Betts swung at a pitch you shouldn't have swung at. Freddie Freeman swung at a pitch you shouldn't have swung at. Trey Turner, you got to do better than a weakly hit ground ball right to the second baseman with the bases loaded and one out. Just it's simple.
Well, and
simple
also,
stuff.
With Trey too, that's kind of been his MO. I don't know if an article came out last year or early this year that he hits into like an insane number of double plays for somebody who is that fast. Like,
he hits the ball too hard.
Like it doesn't make sense. And so it was just that, I think, bad timing. I don't know if I would have necessarily swung at the first pitch. And that's a different discussion, obviously. But yeah, I mean, look, I think it's important to remember at the end of the day, the Dodgers still have one of the best records in the National League. There are some weaknesses that probably need to be addressed by the trade deadline. And I think Andrew Friedman has shown over the years that he will do that more times than not. We still kind of have time until we get there. And, Clayton Kershaw just got back and he, like we touched on earlier, I think he pitched well, all things considered, with how long he'd been off and some of the stuff that happened during the game. So, I think I can understand why there's overreaction. I know fans get upset and frustrated with stuff, but I think it's important to remember it's still only June.
Yeah. Okay. Skaboody puts this one up. Dude, they get paid $260 million. They need to start hitting with runners in scoring position. I just looked this up. Okay. This was not a prepared statistic. I'll ask you, Matt, if you had to guess, there's 30 teams in the league, 28 teams in the league, something like that. I don't even know. Where do you think the Dodgers rank in terms of batting average with runners in scoring position?
Well, I feel like because of the way you've set this up that it's going to be pretty high. So I'll go top 7 to be top 5. I'll do top 5.
Okay. You're slightly off. They're 8th in baseball with a 250 batting average. Okay. But here's the other number. When it comes to OPS, on base percentage plus slugging, which to me is a better number than average, right? Because batting average, like a single versus a double versus a walk, like we got to factor all these things. Second in baseball. Only the Yankees are better with runners in scoring position than the Dodgers. They have a 755 OPS with runners on. That's a 250 batting average, a 330 on base percentage, and a 424 slugging percentage. For context, they are second in on base percentage, 4th in slugging percentage, and 8th in batting average. So there you go. Like, I don't know. And I think if we want to get mad at them for being bad tonight, who do we give credit for them having the second highest OPS on the season? I'm assuming this is not updated by tonight, by the way. So maybe they dropped they're 10, 11 points higher than number 3. So I'm guessing they're not moving down in the OPS rankings.
Yeah. But even if they were to drop down a little bit, that number and that production, that success has come with Mookie Betts getting off to a slow start. Justin Turner not having the season we're expecting. Max Muncy not having the season we're expecting. Will Smith has been inconsistent. Chris Taylor was hot and then trailed off. So again, I think I would definitely be more concerned if all these guys are sort of clicking and the Dodgers were still losing games, right? But there needs to be some, I think we're all willing to agree that there should be some regression back to the mean in a positive way for a lot of the position players. And even the bullpen, they're going through a downturn right now. Maybe they're not necessarily as lights out as they were to begin the season, but we've touched on it. They have a very talented, deep group of relief pitchers. Obviously, there's some injuries there right now too, but eventually those guys should come back and the production should sort of level out. And again, the team should be okay, at least for the regular season. If we want to talk playoffs and how that's going to look, that's a separate discussion.
Yeah, and real quick, some people pointing this out. Fair point. Dodgers in one-run games this season are 4-6. They're 0-4 in extra inning games this season. As to why that is, that's probably a bigger discussion. I would just hint at that Dave Roberts' usage of the bullpen probably plays a role in why they have struggled in extra inning games, because oftentimes it does not feel like they have a plan for what happens if the game were to go into the 10th inning or beyond. But let's not get into that. Let's talk bullpen real quick. Craig Kimbrel, he comes in today. I mentioned this off the top. This is a guy who had been out on paternity leave, had not pitched since June 5th, had been on paternity leave since Tuesday. Today is Saturday. Again, I joked. I'm guessing he was not throwing bullpen sessions while on paternity leave. He comes into the game. Dave Roberts says before the game, Craig Kimbrel's coming into this game no matter what. The Dodgers find themselves in a one-run game, 2-1 in the bottom of the 8th. Craig Kimbrel, who hasn't pitched since June 5th, 6 days ago, comes into the game. He loads the bases with nobody out, throws a curveball into the dirt that ends up scoring the run. Jock Peterson, again, we could argue about whether that's his fault or not. He does get one strikeout before yielding to Evan Phillips, who bails him out. I'll save my thoughts on Craig Kimbrel. I'll let you go first. What did you think of? You could take it wherever you want. Do you want to talk about Dave Roberts deciding, premeditating beforehand that Craig Kimbrel is going to pitch in this game no matter what? Or do you want to talk about just Craig Kimbrel himself?
I think Dave Roberts saying he was going to come in, I don't find it too much of a big deal because he had already telegraphed that like a week ago by saying the Dodgers have a plan to pitch him, every 3 days just to make sure he stays sharp and blah, blah, blah. So I think it was reasonable to expect that had he said that or not, that Kimbrel could have pitched. And I think, frankly, he could have come out and said it and then not pitch Kimbrel. So that doesn't bother me too much. I think, honestly, the Dodgers are just in a position right now where they're burning through their bullpen for one reason or another. And frankly, even if Kimbrel had come back during the White Sox series, I think he just sort of needed to pitch to try to save the guy. And the biggest issue was obviously he ended up allowing a run that proved to be the difference on a wild pitch, and the umpires had a hand in that, but whatever, we can table that. The biggest issue for me was that Kimbrel couldn't even get through the 9th inning, so the Dodgers had to use yet another relief pitcher because they're behind the 8 ball and they just can't seem to catch up and get their legs under them. Fortunately, they have a few off days coming up, and so that'll help. But I think Kimbrel getting into the game wasn't the end of the world for me.
Yeah, I tend to agree. Like, if he's going to pitch at some point, they didn't use him yesterday. I'd like to think they had a sense of what they were getting out of him, that they got a sense of like, hey, have we pitched at all in the last 5 or 6 days? Are we just cold? Like, what's the routine been? Obviously, he was not good in this one. I'd like to sort of write that one off to he's rusty. I don't love that if I'm going to say he's rusty, then I think the argument is why the heck's he in this game? Why is Evan Phillips not coming into that game? I don't know. I guess I don't, as weird as it sounds, I just don't have a super strong opinion. I understand why they used him. I think it's incredibly bizarre that you would say before the game, Craig Kimbrel is definitely pitching in this game, because then it feels like no matter what happens, he's going to pitch, which it is kind of how it seemed to have played out. And then he comes in and struggles, and that looks really stupid in hindsight, like to say that. And it doesn't really benefit anybody to say that. Like, I don't know who you are saying that for. But I don't know. I think it's weird. I still, I had people in my mentions on Twitter saying Craig Kimbrel's washed. He's throwing 97. Like, the curveball still looks nasty. He just can't throw it for strikes. So I think if you believe in him being able to figure out the curveball, the fastball is still getting swings and misses. The fastball looks lively. It's just a matter of, can he throw a second pitch to where players can't just sit on the fastball? That's where I'm at with Kimbrel. I think you play the long game with him and trust that he's going to figure it out in the end. And it sounds like fair.
I think that's what tonight was, honestly. Yeah. I think it was, one, we have a plan, like, we need to knock the rust off of him. And this is rust that goes beyond just being on paternity leave. We saw it, against the Mets, and before that, like, the Dodgers were already, like I said, talking about needing to commit to a plan to make sure he pitches regularly, regardless of the situation. So they're mindful that, he needs to kind of get into some sort of rhythm. And I think that's what tonight was. You were kind of just, hoping to get a little bit better results out of him. And like I said, I think the biggest issue is that they ended up having to go to another reliever anyway.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, look, Dodger fans are ill when they're trying to rationalize using Kimbrel and Rusty in a rundown. Again, it's like, what did you, I don't know what the expectation is. Like, unless you think Craig Kimbrel is just trash and should never pitch, at some point he's going to pitch. He still, by all intents and purposes, is your closer. So you're up by 1 run in the 8th inning on the road. Hudson's not available. I love Evan Phillips. I think Evan Phillips is better. But here, I'll throw Jason up here one more time. We appreciate the super comments. He gave one up, but it's still on the offense to win. I said this the other day. If you give up 3 runs and lose, Don't blame pitching. Don't blame pitching. And to the people that wanted to criticize earlier, don't blame umpires either. Don't blame pitching and don't blame umpires, because if you score less than 4 runs and lose, it's the offense's fault. And
especially tonight.
I was just going to say, and I think you dump gasoline on that freaking fire when you put 16 guys on base and go 5 for 28, with runners on base. It's really, really sad. It's really pathetic. And look, my only disagreement, I think, with some folks in the chat is I don't think we extrapolate that out and say, therefore, we have a huge problem. I think this is a one-off. If you're asking me to bet on, do I think that this Dodgers offense figures it out? The answer is yes. And when I say figures it out, I think you could argue they've already figured it out, that they've been figuring it out all year. That's why they're number 1 in the league in runs scored. So there we go. All right. I think we hit everything. Crazy game, crazy Walker Buehler update. Any last thoughts from you, Matt, before we go?
No, not too much. This was, I want to thank everybody who joined us. I know it was a frustrating night, and you guys definitely brought good questions and good discussions. I saw some comments saying they appreciate you and I doing this after a loss. And honestly, we appreciate you guys joining us and giving us interaction. And we don't try to necessarily be homers. I think I definitely am somebody who takes the long view and won't push a panic button too early. And I know that can be a difference of opinions for some people, but hey, like Jeff said, having different opinions makes this fun, right? We can bounce different ideas off of each other and kind of react to stuff. And it was a good conversation. We look forward to another one of these.
Yeah, absolutely. And hey, as Gary says, thanks for letting us vent. Thanks for letting me vent. Thanks for letting Matt vent. I mean, that's the beauty of sports. That's the beauty of this medium, is that we get to get on here and discuss, and we try and make it collaborative for the folks joining us. People think I'm a clown. That's fine. You're watching, Kevin, and we appreciate that. So thanks for joining. You can call me a clown anytime in this chat. It's fun. It's fun for us. This is a way that I always say this is like group therapy for us. After a 3.5-hour game like we watch, we all needed group therapy. So thanks for joining us. The Dodgers, hey, guess what? Still way better than the Giants. Still ahead of the Padres. Still in first place in the division. They're going to be fine. I think is the bottom line. Matt and I would both agree on. They're going to be fine. So we appreciate you joining us. As always, check out DodgerBlue.com. We'll have a recap up of the game. DodgerBlue1958 on social media. That's where you get the latest breaking news, like this stuff about Walker Buehler, quotes from press conferences, that kind of thing. And of course, if you're watching us here on YouTube, please subscribe, ring the notification bell. If you're watching on Facebook, go over to our YouTube, subscribe, and ring the notification bell. We do live shows once a week. Post-game, we do a full podcast on Mondays that goes up on our YouTube, as well as weekly update videos on pieces of news as they come. If you're a podcast person and just hearing about it, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, find DodgerHeads, subscribe. Matt's on, Daniel's on. Scott Gearman, one of our staff writers, has started joining us on those, so it's been fun to do those as well. My name is Jeff. That's Matt. As always, we appreciate you joining us. Dodgers lose 3-2, but they're back at it tomorrow against the Giants. So hopefully, things go a little better then. We'll see you next time.